Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the chemical basis of life, or this is kind of like an introduction to biochemistry, all right? So this is basic biochemistry. First material that we would be talking about is water, all right? So water, this is a molecule that is composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, all right? So in po, molecules that are attracted to water are called hydrophilic, okay? So there are structures within our cells, no, that are referred to as hydrophilic, meaning it's totally fine if they are exposed to water. But then there are also molecules that are not attracted to water and would like to avoid contact with water. So these structures would now be referred to as hydrophobic. So sa mga cells natin, meron din pong mga ganitong structures. Alright, so there are structures within our cells that are considered as hydrophobic. So they are positioned in a way na hindi sila exposed dun sa water content on the inside and outside of our cells. For living organisms, specifically humans, ano ba ang pakinabang ng water? So water stabilizes body temperature, all right? In our previous discussion, we talked about how external changes and internal changes could affect body temperature. Now, the water content in our body is also being utilized by our cells or by our organs to maintain a stable body temperature. Again, if you would remember, the normal body temperature for humans is approximately 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. Water could also protect the body. So in our previous discussion, so chapter 1, we talked about body cavities, diba? Or yung spaces in between the coverings of the organs and the coverings of the walls of the body. So ayan po, the spaces between those, or yun nga, yung body cavities, they're actually filled with fluids. So those fluids are mostly composed of water, some proteins, and trace amounts of other materials. So ayan po, water could also protect or provide cushion in the body. Next, water is required for many chemical reactions. All right, so ayan po, there are enzymes, there are hormones, there are activities within our cells na hindi kayang gawin ng mga cells natin if water is not present. So water is also very important for many different chemical reactions. Next, let's talk about organic molecules. So organic molecules, these are otherwise referred to as molecules for life. Right? So usually living organisms have these types of chemical compounds or these types of molecules. So examples of this would be carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. So i-discuss din naman po natin itong mga to in slightly more detail as we progress through this chapter. Alright, so first up are carbohydrates. Alright, so carbohydrates, they contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All right, so in simpler terms, carbohydrates could also be referred to as sugars. Okay, so there are 3 different types of carbohydrates: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. The monosaccharides, these ones are made up of 1 sugar only. So this is composed of a simple sugar. And this is basically the building block of all the other sugar structures that we would be mentioning in the next few slides. So ayan po, examples of monosaccharides would include glucose and fructose, the type of sugar that could be found from fruits. All right, and glucose naman po, this is the most readily available or the most readily utilizable structure of sugar that could be used by our cells. All right, so glucose po yung main type of sugar na kailangang magkaroon yung mga cells natin so that they could break this down and create energy or create ATP molecules. We'll discuss that further when we talk about ATP. Pero yun po, again, examples of monosaccharides or exactly 1 sugar structure is glucose and fructose. Next are disaccharides, all right? Disaccharides are composed of exactly two sugars. So as we can see in this example, if we combine glucose and fructose together, we would have what is known as sucrose. Sucrose is the regular table sugar that we can find in the market. Next is glucose and galactose. So kapag pinagsama natin ang monosaccharide na glucose and ang monosaccharide na galactose, that would form lactose, which is the main form of sugar that could be found in milk. Next are polysaccharides. Now, these ones are composed of dozens and dozens of sugar molecules. So many sugar molecules linked together would create polysaccharides. Examples of this would be starch, which could be found in a lot of food items like rice, bread, those types of foods, potatoes, all right? And this could also be found in glycogen. Now that we've mentioned it in the previous slide, what is glycogen? So glycogen is the main storage form of glucose in humans, all right? So hindi naman all the time lahat ng glucose na kino-consume natin is kaya nating i-convert into energy, lalo na kung hindi naman tayo magastos sa energy. Kumbaga, if we don't do a lot of physical activity, we don't really consume or we don't really use up all of the sugars that we intake from food items. So ayun po, kukunin nyo ng katawan natin and ipapackage nyo to in a form of, or in a way na pwede itong ma-store lang for future use. And again, the term for that is glycogen. So these ones, this could be broken down by cells to make ATP, which is the main molecule responsible for being, ayun nga, kind of like the molecule for energy. All right, so ayan po. It also mentions here starch and cellulose. Starch and cellulose are important polysaccharides that could be found in plants. Now, humans could ingest starch and use it to make ATP. All right, so nabanggit ko kanina, diba, examples of starchy foods like rice, bread, potatoes. All right, so if you would notice, yung main ingredients ng mga bagay na yon is also from plant sources, diba? Rice, potatoes, all right? So humans cannot digest cellulose, but it provides fiber necessary for our diets. Okay, so ayun po. Ulitin natin, starch and cellulose, these are examples of polysaccharides. For humans, we are capable of ingesting starch and using it to create energy. Pero for cellulose, we can't really break this down. So ang nangyayari na lang po is nagiging source of fiber na lang ito. Now we're done with carbohydrates. Let's now talk about lipids. So lipids, katulad ng carbohydrates, they're also made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Pero ang pinagkaiba ng lipids sa carbohydrates is that they have a lower proportion of oxygen to carbon. So mas kaunti daw po yung oxygen molecules ng lipids in comparison to carbohydrates. Another description that was said here is that they are insoluble in water, meaning hindi natin sila kayang ihalo or tunawin sa tubig. One of the most readily observable examples of this would be if you literally mix oil with water, all right? So you take any type of oil, whether it be cooking oil, vegetable oil, sunflower oil, baby oil, and then mix that with water. Kahit anong halo nyo, kahit paano nyo sila kalugin, hindi talaga sila maghahalo, di ba? Eventually, aangat po sa taas or magsa-separate papunta sa taas yung oil and then nasa ibaba yung water. So that's what we mean when we say lipids are insoluble in water. They cannot be mixed or dissolved in water. So listed here are examples of lipids, fats, oils, cholesterol, triglycerides, and phospholipids. Now, what are the functions of lipids? Ano ba ang pakinabang ng lipids for us humans? First up, they could serve as long-term energy storage. I-compare natin yan with carbohydrates, specifically glucose, right? Ang glucose or ang carbohydrates, mas madali kasi silang i-break down ng cells natin, so mas madali silang magamit for energy production or for the production of ATP. Pero ang lipids, because of their structure, hindi sila agad-agad nai-utilize or nagagamit ng cells natin to create energy. So may mga extra steps pa para magamit sila ng cells natin to create energy. So usually, ini-store na lang sila. So again, lipids could act as an energy storage. This also has the capability to insulate against heat loss. Next is to provide cushion for organs, all right? So some of our body organs may have a thin layer of fat surrounding them. So ayun po, that also acts to kind of like protect those body organs. Last one that was mentioned here is cholesterol. So cholesterol is part of the cell membrane structure. So may mga structures po yung mga cells natin that encloses other things that could also be made out of cholesterol. Listed here are the different types of lipids. Dito po hinhighlight ko na lang kung ano yung mahalaga. So ano yung kumbaga parang keyword natin para sa kanila and examples. First up are saturated fats. So they have single covalent bonds. All right, saturated fats, meron silang iisa lang na covalent bond. Examples of these are stuff that could be found in our diet like meat, beef and pork, diba? So these types of meat, milk, cheese, eggs. If you would know, diba, cheese is also made out of milk. So it makes sense that they both contain saturated fats and eggs. So these are examples of sources of saturated fats. Next are unsaturated fats. So they contain more double covalent bonds. And examples of this usually could be found in oils, all right? So olive oil, fish oil, sunflower oil. So ayan po. Usually unsaturated fats could be found in oils. This slide simply shows us the general structure of phospholipids, kung nasaan located yung nitrogen, yung phosphorus, where are the oxygen molecules located, and what it would look like, with all that carbon and hydrogen bonds. So ayan po, also shown here is the polar hydrophilic region or hydrophilic head, which is this general area right here. Hydrophilic meaning okay lang, water-loving, okay lang if exposed siya to any water source on the inside or outside of the cell. Next is the non-polar hydrophobic region. So ito naman po, usually within our cells, they are positioned in a way na hindi sila naka-expose dun sa inside or outside ng cell kung saan merong water. We are now done with carbohydrates. We're done with lipids. Let's now talk about proteins. So katulad ng mga naunang nabanggit, meron din silang carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but this one, proteins also have nitrogen. So ayan po. Proteins, they are made up of amino acids. So the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. Okay, ulitin po natin yon. The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So they contain an amine group, which is composed of nitrogen and hydrogen, and then they also have what is known as a carboxyl group, which is composed of carbon, oxygen, and also hydrogen. This slide just shows us the linear sequence or general structure of protein. So bawat isang bilog daw po, each one of these circles would represent one amino acid, and the spaces between them or the lines that kind of like connect them is known as the peptide bond. So ulitin natin, each amino acid is the building block of proteins. Now, these building blocks are connected together by peptide bonds. All right, and tulad ng nabanggit natin kanina, it has an amine or amine group, which is right here, and ito yung nitrogen and hydrogen, and they have a carboxyl group, which is right here, which is composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. So now, let's talk about the functions of proteins. Ano ang pakinabang ng proteins? Bakit kailangan natin ng proteins? These ones are used to make hair, skin, nails, and muscles. Alright? So, ayan po. Ito daw yung mga components, no, within the human body, no, that would not be created or they would not possibly exist without the help of proteins. Next, they are part of the hemoglobin molecule. The hemoglobin molecule is the structure that is responsible for carrying oxygen or binding to oxygen within our red blood cells. All right, so ayan po, just an introduction to the red blood cells. Red blood cells, they function to carry oxygen. Diba? If anybody here has seen the anime Cells at Work, diba yun yung trabaho nila, kumuha ng oxygen at i-deliver ito to the different parts of the body. Alright, so red blood cells are capable of doing that because they have hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is a type of protein that has the capability to bind to oxygen. Next, some enzymes in our body are also made up of proteins. Some components of our immune system that is important for fighting infections are also made up of proteins. Proteins are also responsible not just for building muscles, but also helping the muscles contract or move. And ayun po, our cell membranes are also composed of proteins. Now, right here we have the term protein denaturation. To overly simplify the statement said here, kapag sinabi nating protein denaturation, this is the destruction of the protein, making the protein no longer functional. Alright, so ulitin natin. Ayan po, tignan natin yung expanded definition. Protein denaturation occurs when hydrogen bonds are broken and the protein becomes non-functional. Basically, masisira yung structure ng protein at mawawalan na rin siya ng pakinabang. That's what we mean when we say protein denaturation. Listed here are the possible causes of protein denaturation. So high temperatures, kapag sobrang init, pwedeng masira ang mga proteins, and improper pH. So there are proteins out there na meron silang preferred pH, whether this be acidic or alkaline or neutral, no? Iba't ibang klase ng proteins, iba't iba din yung preferred environmental pH nila. So kung halimbawa, itong protein na ito na nag-e-exist sa isang neutral environment ay ililipat natin sa isang environment that is very acidic, masisira yung structure niya, and again, it would no longer be functional. So ayan po, that's what we mean when we say protein denaturation, and these are the things that could lead to protein denaturation. Next, let's talk about enzymes. So, tulad na nabanggit kanina, proteins could also make up enzymes. All right, there are enzymes out there that are made up of proteins. So, these are organic catalysts that could increase the rate of biochemical reactions. Again, i-simplify natin itong statement na to. May mga processes, no? May mga ginagawa yung mga cells natin, no, na kaya naman nilang gawin normally. They could proceed with these chemical reactions normally on a day-to-day basis without the help of enzymes. But if enzymes are present, they could speed up the process. Okay, yun po yung ibig sabihin kapag sinabi nating increase the rate of reaction. They could speed up the process. All right, so that is the function of enzymes. They could help with the biochemical reactions that is happening within our cells. Up next are nucleic acids. So tignan natin ang composition ng nucleic acids. Aside from carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, meron ding phosphate, no? Meron ding phosphate compounds ang nucleic acids. So nucleic acids, ang pinakakilala na forms ng nucleic acids for us humans are the DNA and the RNA, or the deoxyribonucleic acid and the ribonucleic acid. Now, what are the components of nucleic acids? As we can see right here, these are the nucleotides. So, ang mga nucleotides daw po, sila yung building blocks of nucleic acid. Okay, i-rewind natin dun sa pinag-uusapan natin kanina. If nucleotides are building blocks of nucleic acids, ano naman po ang building blocks of proteins? It's the amino acids. Alright, so wag pong kakalimutan yun. Again, If you would like to create proteins, you need its building blocks, which are amino acids. Now, if you would like to create nucleic acids, you would need its building blocks, which are the nucleotides. All right, so nucleotides, they are composed of a nitrogen base and a phosphate and a 5-carbon sugar. So ayun po, tama naman, no? It adds up with the main components that are listed right here. Shown here is just an illustration of what the structure of the DNA would look like. Let's now talk about ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So ATP is an especially important organic molecule found in all living organisms. So tignan po natin, no? As the name implies, this is mainly composed of adenosine and 3 phosphate groups, or kaya nga siya binigyan ng pangalan na triphosphate. Now, ATP is often called the energy currency of cells because it's capable of storing and providing energy. So, yun po, yung food items na kinakain natin, no? Once our digestive system breaks them down, once na-acquire na nito yung glucose, no? If may sugar content yung mga pagkain na kinakain natin, what would happen here is kukunin na or i-absorb na ng mga cells natin yung glucose, and through biochemical reactions, they would now kind of like create ATP. And ATP is a very important molecule, no, for other cell functions to happen. So kumbaga, gamitin natin itong term na to na energy currency. And let's kind of like compare that to how we actually live, all right? So for us humans, no, our currency is money, all right, or pesos, di ba? So may mga bagay tayong nagagawa, may mga bagay tayong nabibili, nakukuha using our money. It's kind of like that for cells, but instead of pesos, they use ATP, all right? So with the help of ATP, they're capable of generating energy, and they are capable of performing different functions, all right? So ayun po, yun yung pakinabang ng adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Shown here is just the general structure of ATP. So nakikita natin na andito yung adenosine molecule, and then these are yung 3 phosphate groups. Okay, so as you can see right here, this structure could be further broken down. Pwedeng adenosine lang yung meron tayo, pwedeng adenosine diphosphate, so kulang ng isang phosphate group, and yung functional unit, which is the adenosine triphosphate. That ends our discussion on basic biochemistry. Again, I am Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for listening.